I'm a preacher's kid. I grew up with my mom, dad, and older brother. Most of my life I lived in a parsonage. A parsonage is a house provided by the church to the preacher and his family. Contrary to popular belief, ministers make very little. Unless you're Joel Osteen or preach at a megachurch, preachers make just above the poverty line. That's why I knew it was a calling for my dad. I definitely knew he wasn't in it for the money. But I'm not here to push my religious beliefs or win you over to the virtues of my family. I'm here to tell you about the haunting. I'll be touching on religious topics, but only where the story demands it for context. My family moved into the parsonage in the late 90s when I was 10. I fully believe that there were dark things already waiting for me there. I'm in my 30s now, and I still look back on those times with absolute terror. This was before Zach Baggins told us about EVPs and residual hauntings, before the Paranormal Activity franchise made my story cliché, and before YouTubers had list videos about the type of hauntings, and before I knew that the first signs of a demonic haunting is the appearance of shadow people. Like I said, I'm an adult now. I've done my research. I've tried to debunk everything. Part of me sincerely hopes it isn't real. I wish a doctor would have diagnosed me with a mental disorder that caused hallucinations. I wish I would have found out my room was getting too much carbon monoxide. I wish there was an actual human intruder secretly living in the attic. Because the alternative is too much. It's too dark. I had to grow fast, or I would have been consumed by the abyss of nihilism. I was only 10 years old, dealing with ageless, hateful entities. I believe this creature was already there at the parsonage when we moved in. Maybe somebody knew it was for preachers and they put a curse on it. Now, it was just laying dormant, waiting for something to call it, to channel it. So now we need to talk about the movie Event Horizon. I'm not saying the sci-fi movie directed by Paul W.S. Anderson is an evil movie. I just think the darkness at my house used the movie. Like how spirits use a seance or Ouija board to grow stronger. It used my fear of the movie to manifest itself. My parents knew the negative consequences of keeping their kids sheltered for too long. My parents knew being too strict would have had the opposite effect on us when we left the house. They didn't want to let us become adults being naive and with no self-control. We would bolt towards bad decisions like a dog finally let off his leash. So I grew up on Terminator 2, edited for TV Jason movies, and all the Die Hards, also edited for TV. I loved the Aliens and Predator movies, and Doom 64 was my favorite game on my Nintendo. So you can see why me and my brother wanted to rent Event Horizon after seeing the previews, which makes you think aliens are the bad guys. Well, spoilers for a 20-year-old movie, it's not aliens, it's hell. Like the literal hell from the Bible. Think of the horrors of the warp from Warhammer 40k. I won't spoil it any further for those wanting to see the film, but there's one scene in particular that effed me up. If you've seen the film, you know the scene I'm talking about. The scene shows people being tortured in hell. I actually love the movie now and own the Blu-ray, but that scene scared the shit out of 10-year-old me. I shrugged it off pretty cool-like in front of my older brother until the nighttime came. Once again, I started thinking about that movie. That scene. My young mind started questioning everything with Sunday school logic. Do people really go to hell? Is that what it's like? What if we all go to hell? What if I do? How do I even comprehend eternity? What if there is no heaven? Only the darkness afterward? Only hell? I was having an existential crisis before I hit puberty. This wasn't like all the other spooky movies I had been scared by. This was crushing. And then the physical things started happening. My eyes wouldn't adjust to the lack of light in my room. There was pitch black darkness all around me. I started to shiver in my bed because it was cold all of a sudden. I felt cold tendrils sneaking up my leg, chest, and finally shoulders. Me and my brother shared the same room, but I was too scared to call out for him. It felt like the darkness was right in front of my face. I felt like something in the darkness would lash out and bite me, like a snarling wolf hovering over its prey. Somehow, in my shivering, terrified state, I fell asleep. The dream I had was vivid and grim. In my dream, I was standing naked in a forest. A great tree stood in front of me. It stretched high into the sky like a building. I could see dots of color up in its green tree limbs. It was bearing fruit. I knew, like you do in dreams, that I was in the Garden of Eden, and this was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Beside me stood Adam and Eve, both naked and afraid. That's when I noticed I was naked, and cold, and scared also. I could feel the cold wind against my skin. Suddenly, vines shot up the tree. Giant, Jack and the beanstalk vines with giant foot-long thorns protruding outwards from them. The vines spiraled all the way up the tree, strangling it. The thorns on the vines jutted out in every angle, making the vines impossible to climb. I saw glistening liquid dripping from the tips of the thorns. Somehow, I just knew it was poison and would kill me on contact. Then I heard a voice from far up in the tree. Adam and Eve and I looked up to see a gigantic snake staring down from the tree branches. The snake's massive red eyes glowing down at us like spotlights.
No salvation for you.
The snake hissed down at us, venom in its throat.
God has forsaken you, and we will all burn together.
I woke up, shaking and terrified. But unlike most dreams that fade upon waking, I felt the nightmare grow stronger upon waking. It felt like there was a presence in the room with me now. Think of the feeling you got when your teacher asked you to do a problem on the chalkboard and you could feel the entire class staring at your back. Or when you walk by a yard with an aggressive dog in it, the dog only kept away by a fence. You can feel the violent intent directed towards you. You can feel the eyes on you. It felt like it was in my closet, or in the dark corner, or maybe on the roof above me, or it could be peeking at me from the foot of my bed. This was when the waking nightmare began. I was scared all the time. There always felt like a malicious presence was around me. I was always cold and lethargic. The cold was a lonely cold. I felt like hope had been stripped from me. I could not think of anything happy or warm. My optimistic childhood mindset had been ripped out of me. No matter how much I tried, my mind always returned to the hopeless and lost feeling. I just didn't have the mental maturity to fight through it. From what I can recall, this went on for at least 6 months. My parents noticed something was different, and when I told them how I felt, they just thought I had been spooked by a scary movie and I would get over it. So a couple of lonely and scared months passed. I talked rarely and always wanted to be around someone so I didn't feel alone with the presence. I think I started getting better when summer ended and I went back to school. For most of the day, I was surrounded by classmates and friends, but the darkness always returned to my heart when I got home. Soon as I crossed the threshold, it felt like the cold weight of despair had dropped inside my stomach, making me weak and sullen. Finally, my brain started telling me that I wasn't in danger. I always felt like I was about to be hurt, like I was a prisoner with a guillotine hanging over my head. But after months, I realized there was no danger, only the feelings of dread. I started trying to take back my life. I started to ignore the unyielding feeling of despair and emptiness. But this only made things worse. YouTube, Google, and even MySpace weren't a thing yet, there was nobody to teach me about hauntings, and nobody who would really listen. Most of all, there was nobody to teach me about shadow people. I think ignoring whatever entity upset it. Like a petulant child, it wanted all of my attention. So it started acting out more. It started trying to get me afraid again. It began trying to steal my joy. It was trying to get me to think about it every day, trying to get me to worship it in its own vile way. So let me set the scene for you. The hallway outside my room ran to a small foyer area where the front door was located. From the foyer, you had two options. The doorway to the left that ran through the living room, or the door on your right that led through a dining room area. From each of these rooms, you could continue into the kitchen and the side entrance. Also during this time, there was a string of burglaries and auto burglaries in the neighborhood. The neighborhood was on high alert, and my dad feared our house was too vulnerable, because the side entrance had a door with a big glass window. My dad feared a burglar could easily look in to see everything, and break the window to unlock it. I was 12 at this time. I was a scrawny, acne-ridden kid, and I knew it. So I had a plan if I saw a burglar. I would yell in a deep voice, pretending to be bigger and tougher than I was. So keep that in mind. I would always walk through the living room when going to the kitchen. The lights in the living room needed to be replaced, so they would flicker a couple of times before turning on. I hated that, because every time I hit the switch, I swear I could see something moving in the darkness. Then the light would come on to reveal nothing. During the strobe effect, I would only see the figure when it was dark. The figure would duck behind the couch, be sitting on the love seat or crouched on the carpet. All this kept up for weeks. I didn't want to think it was supernatural. I wanted it to be a trick of the light. I wanted all the spirit stuff behind me. I wanted to grow up and not be afraid of silly things like ghosts and demons. But it got to the point that I would look down as the light blinked and only lifted my head once it fully clicked on. One night, I didn't look down. I was back in my parents' room talking with my dad. He suddenly asked me to go get him a soda from the kitchen. I was in a good mood and in a hurry to get back to the conversation with my dad. I ran and flicked on the light, looking straight ahead. As the light flickered on and off, I saw the pure black outline of a 7-foot-tall man. It stood in the middle of the room facing me head on, like it was challenging me. What made this different was when the light was on, it didn't disappear. And when the light was off, I could still see its black outline against the darkness around it. Think of it this way. Take a cardboard cutout of a person, spray paint it black, and put it in a non-lit room. The dark cutout would still stand out against its surroundings. You would be able to see it because it was darker than its surroundings. The thing just stood there, blacker than black, flaunting its existence to me. Being confronted with this, my brain screamed, "It's real! It's really here! So it has to be a burglar!" In my fake deep voice, I screamed, "Hey, asshole! What are you doing in here?" The thing stood there for a while, and I was hit with a sudden realization that it wasn't a man, but a featureless shadow. It slowly floated backwards, never turning from me, as the light flickered. It eventually drifted around the corner, into the kitchen, and out of my view. Only then did the lights turn on. My dad heard me scream and came running. I told him I saw a person so I wouldn't look crazy. My dad searched the house and checked the side door. The door was still locked. Let's just say that my parents didn't take me very serious with the spooky stuff. It was only 10 years later that my mom admitted something supernatural was happening, but that's its own story. And my dad half admitted that the house felt different. Even now, I can't explain it. I thought maybe I was hallucinating or had mental problems. I'm not saying these things are a blessing, but at least I could get medication or do something to help end the nightmare. I don't want any of this to be real. I hope one day I can debunk all of it. I never saw the shadow people anywhere else but the parsonage. And worst of all, family and friends started seeing them too. I have a lot more stories in the parsonage, and I'm willing to share them if there is any interest. As promised, I have more stories to tell about my childhood at the parsonage. I'm going to try and cover a couple of years, so forgive me if it seems like I'm jumping around. After I saw the shadow person standing in my living room, things got a lot worse. I started experiencing hardcore sleep paralysis, or I would have incredibly realistic lucid dreams. In my dreams, I would get up, get ready for school, go to the car with my mom, and then be right back in bed. This cycle would repeat over and over. The dreams would be so real that I would check to see if I was dreaming during my dream. My reflection was the same. I could feel the soles of my feet on the ground. I could read text messages on my phone. I've heard you're not supposed to be able to read in dreams, but my brain didn't get the memo. As frustrating as the repeating Groundhog's Day dreams were, they had nothing on the dreams with the hag. I would open my eyes, unable to move, a prisoner to my bed. I would hear her first. She did the croaking things like the girl on The Grudge, except it was a little more vocal. She would crawl across the floor to the foot of my bed. I would feel her cold body against mine as she crawled under the covers towards my face. She looked a lot like the Grudge girl, except she was Caucasian and only had whites for eyes. Her smell was a damp, rancid smell, like the dumpster behind a seafood restaurant. She would place her hands on my face and dig into me with her long nails. Thankfully, that's when I would wake up. When I finally awoke, I would be confused, aggravated, and scared. I remember having goosebumps from her cold touch. When it was nighttime, I would wake up from nightmares to see shadow people in my room. As I blinked to adjust to the dark, they would disappear. This happened nightly. One shadow person even appeared right in my face at the edge of my bed when I heard a loud popping noise that woke me up. I struck out an instinct only to see my hand disappear into the black mass before the shadow vanished and I could see my arm again. On a separate occasion, I could hear the deafening scream coming from my weight bench. I jolted awake and saw a shadow sitting on my weight bench looking at me. I could feel hate and anger pouring out of it towards me. I remember laying in bed, trying to keep my eyes closed, only for my bed to start breathing in and out, like I was lying on the chest of a giant. I would hear her random loud taps against the walls and heavy footsteps, sometimes soft moans. It was all a part of the torture. The sleep deprivation and constant stress made me feel like I was going crazy. But life went on. I still had to get up every day. I just had to accept the supernatural was being natural. And there would be long times of no activity. But I have to say, I was glad when others started experiencing things. My across-the-street neighbor was one of my best friends. Me and another mutual friend, Brian, had just returned from hanging out across the street. No cars were under the carport, meaning my mom and dad were out. So when we came in, we were being loud, goofy middle schoolers. There was a vanity with a mirror in the foyer that faced the dining room and kitchen. As we walked down the hallway, we could clearly see our reflections in the kitchen behind us. In the reflection, my mom walked up behind us to a kitchen counter and leaned over it. It was as clear as day. She had her glasses on, her purse, and a little notepad she carried around. "Oh, Mom, I thought you were gone," I said as I turned around. Nothing was there. And I thought I had imagined it, like how you think you see something if you pass a doorway quick enough. But Brian's face was pale. He saw her too. He told me she was leaning over the counter with her notepad. Let's just say we decided to go back over to our friend's house. What sort of entity was this, that it used my mom's likeness to scare me? I had a step-nephew, more like a little brother. He was 5 years younger than me and annoying as hell, but I loved him. He would stay over and sleep on a mattress in my room. I was 13 and had my own room by now. There was the weight bench with at least 250 pounds on it in the corner of the room. I had put all the weights on the bar to clean up the floor, plus it had 50 more pounds on the leg lift. So, hyper-annoying nephew won't go to sleep, keeps talking, keeps wanting stories. So I start telling him all the scary stuff so he will be scared and quiet. I get onto it and give every creepy detail. His face started looking more and more frightened as the story continued. All of a sudden, the weight bench that was across the room rocks like it had been kicked. The metal weights all clang together, making a loud racket. Above the weight bench, a small blue orb winked into existence and shot up into the roof. We agreed to change the subject and maybe watch a comedy movie. There was an instance when the windows in the front dining room had somebody knocking at them as I did homework. I ran to the window and clearly saw the back of my friend's head while he ducked down. I called across the street to get his older brother to come and get him or help me scare him back. As I stood looking out the window to his house, I heard my friend answer. He had no idea what I was talking about. He even came to his window and waved at me. I had been watching his house the whole time. Finally, when I was around 17 or 18, I was in my room trying to sleep. I've always been religious and was praying. I heard a loud, clear growl about 3 feet from me. At this point in my life, I was sick of it and started cursing at whatever it was. My mom opened the door to see what was wrong and to scold me for dropping multiple F-bombs. She told me she heard the growl from the hallway. It was so clear she thought it was from my video games and I was cursing into my headset. There is a last thing that I could use help with if somebody knows what this is. I was woken up again in my room, and in my closet was a glowing white face with black holes for eyes. It looked like one of those masquerade or drama masks. It looked almost identical to the very last scene of Insidious 3, when the psychic lady sees the white face in her home right before the credits. Except this was years before. And director's commentary says the writers got a lot of inspiration from real accounts of the paranormal. If anybody knows the meaning or significance, please message me. It's been one of the countless questions on my mind for years. Well, that's all for my high school and middle school days. I wish it would have ended there, but there is one last terrifying chapter to this story. What happens when a boy who's haunted meets a girl who's haunted too? I'm going to have to tread lightly on this one. The story revolves a lot around my ex-girlfriend, and we didn't end on good terms. It's been over a decade now, and I'm pretty sure it's all water under the bridge for the both of us. But I have no way of contacting her to ask her for permission to tell her story, so I'll have to keep it vague so I don't blow up her spot. After high school, I thought I was free of my haunted home. I planned to join the Marines and be gone for at least 4 years. Well, without getting into too much detail, I got hurt in boot camp, and this led to the corpsmen finding out about another medical problem I had lied about to join up. Don't think me scummy. This is pretty common practice among recruiters. I was told to tell the MEPs I was as fit as Captain America so I could ship out. I was desperate to leave and serve my country during the height of both wars on terror. But stress fractures in my shins led to more problems, and that led me coming back home. You can see how the anger and depression started again. I felt trapped, like the parsonage was a black hole sucking me back in. There I was, starting from square one again. Like most 18 to 19-year-olds, I was trying to figure out my life. That's when I met Ashley, and we started dating. We knew each other back in the day and reconnected later in life. The biggest obstacle we had was she lived 2 hours away. My parents tried to work with us. She could come stay the weekend, but I had to respect my parents' rules and sleep in a separate room from hers. I didn't mind. It was their house, their rules. Other times, I went to stay at her apartment, and that's when the weirdness started. First off, I noticed she slept with multiple layers of blankets, still had a nightlight and a collection of stand-up comedy CDs and stereo right next to her bed. Every time I slept there, she put me on the side closest to the closet. I would have sleep paralysis every night, but these were a little different. I was sharing the point of view of something in the closet, looking at me sleeping. I could see myself asleep, and I could feel the anger directed towards me from the entity. I would float closer to my sleeping face and begin cursing in an unknown hateful language. I felt the jealousy of the entity. I felt the anger toward myself because I was in its way. When I woke up, I would usually spring out of bed. That habit hadn't worn off from boot camp yet. This would scare Ashley because she knew what was happening. She finally told me what was happening to her and her roommate's sister. She said they had seen a shadow stalking them ever since they were children. She had the multiple blankets because she could feel it caressing her at night. The comedy CDs because she could hear her name being whispered and the nightlight was obvious. I know what you're thinking. This is the plot to the Paranormal Activity movies. This all happened in 2006 to 2007. The movie came out in 2009. Anyways, she told me she only slept good when I was there because I was taking all the heat from whatever it was instead of her. I kind of felt like a white knight, saving Milady from demons, so I just rolled with it. But the longer we were together, the worse it got back home. I remember distinctly one night when I drove home from her apartment in the middle of the night. I had to work the next day, so I had to leave around 3 a.m. I was on a dark stretch of highway between cities and trying to stay awake. I started to feel something pushing against the back of my seat. It reminded me of when my friends would mess with me by kicking or kneeing my seat while driving. I tried to ignore it as me being tired, but it got to the point where it was impossible to ignore. It felt like somebody's knees were pressing so hard I was almost touching the steering wheel. I never looked back. That's what it wanted. I knew it was waiting for me to turn around so it could do something to me. How easy would it have been to crash and just be chalked up as me falling asleep at the wheel? So I rolled down the windows and blared Christian music the whole way back. Things came to a head at my house when my parents said Ashley could come over for the weekend. It was a Thursday and I okayed it with her on the phone. That night the shadows came back. I would wake up in the middle of the night to see two of them standing behind the chair in my room. They would fade away the longer I stared at them, but they were making their presence known. She came over Friday and I let her have my bed while I slept in the living room. Around 3 a.m., she came sneaking in to see me. I thought she was up for some rule breaking at first, but then I noticed she had been crying and was shaking. I've seen something in your room, she told me. Are they standing behind the chair? I asked. Her eyes widened in surprise. How did you know? I agreed to sleep in the same room as her, but I slept on the floor in case my parents caught me. I was on the ground speaking up to her on the bed, and somewhere I said, "Oh shit." "Oh shit," was repeated back to me in my own voice from under the bed right next to me. I kind of freaked out and sat up, but I could see she was starting to cry again, so I played it off. The same sleep paralysis that night, except I looked down at myself sleeping by the bed. From the creature's point of view, I could see 2 black boots on my head. Hate and twisted insults spilled out in a guttural voice. We were both immature and broke and far away from each other, so the relationship ended badly. I still regret the hateful things I told her when we were fighting, but one last thing happened before things ended. I was at her apartment again. She was begging me to stay, but I couldn't because of work. She told me she was scared to be alone. As I was comforting her, I saw a glowing orb, like a bubble with yellow in the middle, appearing behind her and shoot off to the ceiling. I had just told her that God would protect her when this thing appeared. It was in a fully lit room, and it was the most blatant thing I had seen since the shadow person in my living room years ago. It was the entity saying, "No, he won't." I'm not in contact with her anymore, but sometimes I think of her and worry. I'm not missing our relationship. It was pretty toxic, but I worry about her hauntings. Life is hard enough without the extra layer of demonic oppression or whatever it was. Well, say a prayer for her. Maybe one for me. The spooky shit has dropped off for over a decade now. I hope talking about it doesn't stir it back up.